I found this $20 Goodwill find covered in a 101 Dalmatians paint job that almost made me walk away, but underneath that Cruella DeVille mess, I had a feeling there was something worth saving. So today we're doing a deep dive. I'm stripping back this table to raw wood, fabricating some custom legs from scratch, and proving that you don't need a massive budget to create a designer level piece. Starting off here with probably everybody's favorite part of my flipping projects, which is paint stripping. The secret to this is really lathering that stripper on as thick as you can. Don't be afraid to really get every single corner and crevice, because that's going to help the actual stripping process. You see I'm just moving it around with my chip brush, and then after about 5 minutes or so, it's already starting to bubble up. I'll actually add some more stripper onto any parts that haven't bubbled up yet, and then wait an extra like 5 minutes to let everything finally get ready to scrape off. And then this is my favorite part, when I go in with my putty knife and get that layer of paint off the solid wood that's hidden underneath. You actually can see there probably was a stain that was on top of this wood, so there's a little bit of orange that's mixing with that paint, but after just 20 minutes of letting that stripper sit, it's coming off so easily. If you're doing this at home or at a project that you have and the paint isn't coming off as easy, that's totally fine. Not all paint is the same. All you have to do is probably just add another layer of stripper, let it sit, and then it should come off pretty easily. Now on these edges that were curved, I'm actually using my carbide scraper to really get in there and get that paint off. The stripper helps loosen it up, but I can't really get it off with that putty knife since it's flat, so this carbide scraper really helps me get into those detailed pieces. Once all the paint was stripped off the top, it was time to flip this thing over and get those legs off. I'm sorry if you like them, but I personally do not like that vintagey style on these legs. I think it's really outdated, and I want to modernize this coffee table as much as possible. So I'm actually going to be removing these legs and getting rid of them, because later on in the video I'm going to be fabricating brand new legs for this coffee table that are a little bit more modern and squared off. I actually have never done this before, so this is the first time that I'll be making these legs, so we're gonna see how it goes. Hopefully everything turns out good. But once those legs were off, I was finally ready to get into my sanding. I use a Surf Prep sander. It's a really expensive sander, to be honest, but it's one of my best investments I've ever made for furniture flipping. I use it on literally every single piece, and you could see it almost just like washes away any finish that you need with ease. So I'm starting off with this at a 120 grit sandpaper, and then I'm working my way up to a 150, then a 180, and then finishing off with a 220 to get things ready for staining. So once the top is all stripped down, I'm going to move on to using my foam pad here, which will really help those curved edges to get into like the nooks and crannies that a flat edge sander wouldn't really get into. And you can see it's just really removing any residue that's left over on the corners and the sides. Now for the edges, I didn't want to do stripper because honestly putting stripper on these sides and having it drip all over the piece is just going to be a mess, and honestly this paint layer wasn't too thick, so I went in with a lower 80 grit sandpaper, which is really coarse and helps just like tear right through that paint. And then for any crevices that were left over, I used the carbide scraper again to really get into the detail work and get all that black paint removed, saving myself from having to clean up any stripper that was dripping all over it, and just using the sander and the carbide scraper on the side saved me a whole bunch of time on this. And actually, I stripped this piece down fairly quickly compared to other pieces that I stripped before, so I was really happy with the process so far. Then it was time to move on to just cleaning up that single drawer that was on the front of the coffee table as well, which I really liked about this piece because it had a little bit of storage that will do really well when I go to relist it and sell it back on Facebook Marketplace once I'm done with everything. Once I was all done sanding, it's very important to try to get all the sawdust and sand off of your piece before any type of pre-stain or stain, because any leftover sawdust is really going to cause blotchiness and unevenness in your stain. So I gave it a really good wipe down, not using any type of spray because that's going to raise the grain and ruin all your sanding that you just did. Just a dry cloth and wiping back all that dust. Now it's time for the pre-stain. This is actually a really softer pine wood. So unlike harder woods, softwoods really absorb anything that you put into them. So it's essential that you use a pre-stain on this kind of stuff. What pre-stain does is basically just prime the wood before putting your stain on it. So your stain won't come out blotchy and uneven. You'll get a really nice finish. It will kind of dilute your stain a little bit, so if you're using a lighter stain, just know that it may come up even lighter than it would without using the pre-stain. I'm actually using a darker stain in the color Espresso here, and since I used my pre-stain before, I know that it's going to come up a little bit lighter, so to kind of combat that, I'm going to leave my stain on for a lot longer. I'm actually going to leave it on for like 10 minutes and let it really soak into the wood to get that deeper, richer color that I'm looking for. I decided to go with a darker stain from this one because if you know me, I just love dark stain in general over lighter stains. I think they're super dramatic and make any space really elevated. But also you could see that this wood kind of had like a yellower tone to it, so I know if I put any lighter stains on it, they wouldn't really work as well, and I didn't want to have that yellow hue like bleed through to the final finish, so using a dark stain will kind of hide all that up. Then this is where I kind of just cross my fingers when I'm wiping it back and hope the color is what I was expecting, and luckily in this case it was beautiful. It came out great. I loved the tones of it. It was a little on like the red orange tone that you could see here, but that's just because the wood is wet from the stain and the pre-stain, so once it dries that'll kind of neutral out and help that like mahogany redness that you see coming up right now. It definitely will still have a little bit of that, but I don't mind it. It kind of gives that vintage feel that I'm looking for, so I really was happy with the results of how this stain came out. After it's all wiped back, I want to make sure I let this sit at least overnight, preferably 24 hours, to let it fully dry before I put any top coat on it, so I avoid smudging or smearing of the stain. So while that was drying, it was time to move on to making the new coffee table legs. Like I said, I've never done this before, so this is totally new to me too. I actually found these farmhouse table legs, I think they're called, from Lowe's. I think they're meant for like dining room tables and taller tables rather than coffee tables, so I'm just measuring here to cut them in half to make 4 legs out of the 2 that I bought. I'm using my miter saw here. I'm just measuring to see where the saw blade is going to cut into the wood because I don't have a fancy miter saw with that laser level. Hopefully I can get one soon, but this one works fine, so there's no reason to upgrade right now. So once I got those cut in half, I had to figure out how they're going to fit into the existing brackets of the coffee table. You could see here when I bring those legs over, since they're square, they won't fit perfectly into those angled brackets, so I'm just marking off here where I need to kind of chip out the corner of these new legs so they fit perfectly like a puzzle piece into the existing body. Once I got them all marked off, I brought it back over to my workbench. I stacked 2 on top of each other because my clamp that I had was so big that it was hitting the ground and wasn't letting me clamp it down, so I just had to elevate it a little bit. And then what I decided on to get that perfect like corner cut is using my jigsaw, because I have a little bit more control, and my jigsaw actually is able to like rotate on an angle. So you'll see I'm using a 45-degree angle here and then just using that to cut away the corner. I'm kind of using like the corner of the square wood as a guide to make it as straight as possible. It doesn't really matter because this is going to be facing inside to the coffee table anyway, so you're not going to see it. So if it's not perfect, don't worry about it. Then to get that piece cut out, I'm using some good old elbow grease and a handsaw. This looks really aggressive, but it really wasn't that bad, I swear. It was just shaking the table a lot, and then I got that corner piece chipped out. And now you can see here, it'll fit almost perfectly into that existing slot where the old legs were. Now I'm actually keeping the old screws that came with those original legs. So what I have to do is use just a marker to go ahead and pinpoint where my new hardware holes need to be drilled out so I could reutilize those screws and washers that came with the piece. So I'm just gonna take this over and drill out some pilot holes with a 5/16 drill bit on all 4 of those legs, and then I went ahead and bought these things that I believe are called wood threads. I think that's what they're called, I'm not 100% sure, but they just go in here, you could see, into those pilot holes and really will give a little bit more grip to the screws, so it's not just going into open wood. It gives kind of a thread to really pull those legs into the base and make sure everything's super secure. So I did a wash and repeat on all 4 of those legs with that same process, and then went ahead and got them sanded down. I did the same sanding method that I did on the body, using a 120 grit to start, then moving up to a 150, then a 180, then a 220 to get things ready for my stain. So this is the part where I was a little bit scared because since I bought this wood at Lowe's and it was not the original wood that came on the coffee table, I wasn't sure if that stain was going to match exactly and kind of look off from the stain that was on the body. So I really was just kind of fingers crossed here. I went ahead and did my pre-stain because I also think that these legs were made out of pine as well. So they're definitely going to soak up that stain like the body did. Then I'm just going in with that same espresso stain and letting it sit for, again, like 10 minutes just to get it as dark as possible. At this point of the day, I'm actually based in Florida, so it's really hot, it's getting humid, and I had my fan going. So in those conditions, sometimes your stain becomes a little tacky. So you can see here, I'm kind of like struggling to get that stain off. That's totally fine. You're just gonna have to put a little bit more work to get it off and kind of like buff that stain out compared to when I was wiping the stain back on the body of the coffee table. But good news, it actually came out to be like a perfect stain match to the body. You would never even tell that those legs were not an original piece from the original body of the coffee table. So that's not normal. I was really happy about this and worried that they weren't going to match. And then it was time to get those legs reattached and finally see like the full new form come to life. Like I said, I'm using those existing screws that came originally with the coffee table that were in those legs actually that you could see here on the side. And those threads that I put in, I brought the screws to Lowe's and made sure that I matched the threads that would fit into the new legs. And this is where I really started to get excited because that modern look is really coming together with the still vintage vibe from the darker stain. I let everything sit overnight and then it was time to put my wipe on polyurethane. You could see here, this is really what brings the piece to life. It makes that stain come alive. It looks nice and glossy and fresh. You can see it looks a little gray almost here, like ashy, and that's because this is actually my second layer of polyurethane that I'm putting on. I put one on the day before, let it dry, and then quickly sanded it down with a 220 grit to smooth it out. So that's why it kind of looks like a little cloudy here. But with that final coat, it gives you that perfect sheen and protection that you're looking for. And then we kind of were on the home stretch, so the only thing left I had to do was to add some new hardware to the storage drawer that was in the front of the coffee table. I had this little antique brass knob left over. I actually had one left and I was waiting for a project to get it used because I did not want to throw it out. So this was the perfect opportunity to use that brass knob, and it just fit perfectly with the vibe that I was going for. Then it was time to get everything reassembled, and it was finally time for the full reveal. As a quick reminder, here is where we started with that $20 Goodwill coffee table find. And the results are amazing. This thing looks completely different. I am so happy with how those new legs came out. Like I said, this is my first time ever doing those legs, so I really had no idea what I was doing, but the process actually came together perfectly. That darker stain kind of plays into the vintage feel that I didn't want to lose, but then now with those blocky, squared off legs, it kind of brings it into modern day style and still has plenty of storage for anybody to use. I plan to relist this thing on Facebook Marketplace for $250, making a pretty decent profit, so we will see how it sells. Let me know in the comments what you think of the results, and as always, I will see you guys for the next flip.